Welcome to our webinar, Succeeding with Forecast Pro. This webinar we will cover working with parent-child projects. Hello and welcome. My name is James Berry and I'm the Director of Training for Forecast Pro. I'll be guiding you through our webinar today. I've been with the company now for over 20 years and have helped hundreds and hundreds of companies worldwide learn how to use Forecast Pro. In today's webinar, we're going to discuss how to set up project collaboration, a new feature that is in version 8 of Forecast Pro. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over a few logistics. First, this webinar is part of an ongoing series and will be run once a quarter. So please, if you haven't signed up already, sign up for the following session. Second, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website where you'll be able to download it at any time. And finally, throughout this webinar, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat and answering questions at the end. Now let's discuss our agenda for today's webinar. We're going to start with an overview, discussing the options that you have available in Forecast Pro for collaboration. And then we're going to focus on how you would use the new project collaboration to its fullest advantage. Next, we're going to do a product demonstration of how this actual project collaboration is set up and works in Forecast Pro itself. We'll go into detail of how to set up the files, as well as where you store your data, and how you interact with multiple users in Forecast Pro. Then finally, we will wrap up with a conclusion and answer any questions that people have. Now let's dive into an overview. To begin, let's look at the composition of our Forecast Pro user base. When we look across all the different companies that use Forecast Pro, over 70% of them have a multi-user environment. And this is important because we need to get feedback from multiple folks, and we need to make sure that we incorporate that feedback in the most optimal way possible. Within Forecast Pro, there are three main ways to collaborate. The first is to use a single project and just have one person responsible for making all of the adjustments. The second is to use Excel collaboration, where we make overrides externally in Excel. And the third is project collaboration, which we will focus on today. Each of these has their own pluses and minuses. Let's look at them one at a time, starting with a single project. From the Pro side, a single project is simple, and we have one main user who's responsible for making all of the statistical and override adjustments. But the biggest problem with a single project is that you have a very large, potentially slow project, and only one person can work on it at any one time. So there truly is only a single person. They will be responsible for gathering feedback and typing in all of those changes by hand. Next, let's look at Excel collaboration. With Excel collaboration, we solve one of the main problems, which is that we can have multiple users working simultaneously. We can export our forecasts out to Excel and have each individual user make changes directly in Excel using the full functionality of the program. The problem is that these Excel files are limited. You can only look at a single level of your hierarchy and you can only work in one single unit, and you're only making overrides. You are not making any statistical forecasting adjustments. This brings us to project collaboration. Project collaboration is the best of both worlds. We allow you to work simultaneously while also allowing each user the ability to change the statistical models. Because we are working in smaller child projects, each project is much smaller and quicker to work on. You're able to work at any level of the hierarchy that you would like, not just a single level like in Excel collaboration. You can bring in multiple units of measure, and you can view external data. This truly is a best of both worlds approach. So let's look at the role of collaboration in Forecast Pro. In a typical monthly process working in Forecast Pro, you start by loading in the data into the parent project. Then the statistical forecast is generated and reviewed, possibly making any additional statistical modeling changes that you would like. Adjustments are made using the override grid. And after a final review, the final forecasts are exported from Forecast Pro. So in this process, the collaboration really takes place in the middle two options when it comes to generating a statistical forecast as well as making override adjustments. Now it's during these two processes that we need to set up how we want our collaborative process to work, starting with the statistical forecast generation. We want to know who will be responsible for the statistical forecasting. Will it be done only in the parent project, or will it be done in the child projects? When looking at the overrides, there are also some key questions to ask. Will we be doing this in the parent project only, or will we allow overrides in the child projects as well? Now let's see an example of how we would set up a parent-child project environment. In our example, we'll start with the main forecaster working in Forecast Pro in the parent project. Their responsibility is to update the historical data, make any statistical model changes. They're also responsible for managing the collaboration project. They will create the child projects and distribute them to each of the individual users. To do this, they break up the parent project into smaller child projects that they distribute to the individual child project users. Each of the child project users has their own responsibility. They will enter overrides, potentially make any statistical forecasting changes if they're responsible for that. They'll also review forecast accuracy and make any changes that are required from there as well. Once all the individual child project users have made their changes, they will send them back to the main parent project, and this person will then consolidate all of the sub-projects, come up with a final consensus review to make sure everything has changed and entered correctly, and then finally export the final forecast out of Forecast Pro. Now let's take a look at this within Forecast Pro itself. Here we are in Forecast Pro. We have loaded in some of our sample data from our auto parts company. Let's start by taking a look at the product hierarchy that we have loaded in. Here in Excel, we can see the hierarchy in more detail. Our top level is a total, followed by our region, then our product categories, our SKU totals, and finally our customer down at the bottom level. Back here in Forecast Pro, you can also see in our parent project, we have set up multiple override rows. One for our demand planning team, one for our regional managers, another for our sales, and finally one for our consensus review. We're going to set up two examples of project collaboration today, one by region and another by salesperson. Since we already have region here in our product hierarchy, this makes for a very clean way to break up our project into smaller child projects. We'll easily be able to distribute the different regional child projects to each regional manager and get their feedback. The other way we're going to break up our data is by customer to give these to our different sales managers. Now, in order to accomplish this, we need to use a filter file to set up the child projects. Here in Excel, you can see we have a filter for our salesperson. We have 5 different salespeople, each assigned to a single customer. We will load this filter file in Forecast Pro in order to use it when creating the child projects. Back in Forecast Pro, let's open up the Project Collaboration Manager, which is available directly on the Home tab. Here in the Collaboration Manager, you can see it's currently empty because we have not created any child projects at this point. The first time you walk through this, we need to create the child projects by clicking on the Create Child Project button. Here in the Creation dialog box, we have a lot of key decisions that we need to make. The first is we need to determine if we're going to allow forecasting in the child projects. Now, in our first example, where we break this down by region, we will. In our second example, where we break it down by salesperson, we will turn this off so you can see it both ways. Our next decision that we will need to make is to determine what hierarchy level we want to actually create the child projects at. For this first example, where we're doing it by region, we'll do it at the region level, and in the second example, we will do it at the customer level. Third, we need to set the output location, where these child projects will go. Typically, this will be to some sort of shared drive or network drive, something like a OneDrive or a Dropbox, so that people can have access to their child projects from wherever they are located. And finally, we need to determine how we're going to split up the child projects. Now back here in Forecast Pro, for our first example, we'll do it by region. Again, we will enable forecasting in the child projects. We're moving it by region. We're going to create multiple project files, and we're going to do one for each of the 4 regions. So we'll go ahead and hit Create. And now we can see our 4 child projects have been created. You can see it says they've been created here. And what we will do is we'll open one of these just to take a look. I'm going to go ahead and open up my North America project. Here's my North America child project. As you can see, when I look at the hierarchy, I now only have the North America region. Below, all of the other additional levels are available to me to make changes here. Now, I would want to customize these child projects. For one, I don't need all of these override rows, as I'm only the regional manager and I'm the only one responsible here. So what I would do is I would remove the rows that we do not need to use, leaving just our regional manager here. Since this is a child project, we can have different layouts for the override grid that do not have to match the parent project. I can also turn on additional information by going to the settings. So for example, I have conversions into dollars. I also have external forecasts for open orders. I can go ahead and say OK and turn these on. So now here in my child project, I have access to conversions, I have access to open orders. And because I enabled forecasting, if I go to the forecasting tab, I could change some of the models. So for example, here at air filters, I could apply a top-down forecast. I can also drill into my individual SKUs and make overrides. So if I were to raise the next quarter by 10%, I can come in here and make my comment, raised Q2 10%, and commit this. So as the owner of the child project, I'm responsible for making all of my statistical forecast changes, as well as all of my overrides, and these will all be maintained in my own child project. Now, returning to our parent project, we can see that all 4 of our child projects have been adjusted. You can see here, it says they've all been modified externally. They're now all ready to be imported back into the parent project. Now I could do this one at a time, but I'm not going to. I'm going to select all of these and just say import to bring all of them in at once. Now with all of these imported, now as you can see, all of our changes have been brought in from our individual child projects across all 4 of our regions. So we're able to bring all that information in. But what exactly did we bring in? If we look down here at the override grid, let's see what actually came in. You'll see that there are now 2 new rows that have been loaded into the parent project, the child baseline forecast and the child final forecast. Because the children are responsible for generating the statistical forecast, their statistical forecast has now been loaded in as the baseline or starting point of the parent project. Additionally, any overrides that were made in the child project are put into the child project row. This will represent the final forecasts there. This leaves open the other rows in the parent project to make additional changes, which is especially useful if you're going to do a final consensus review. Now back in Forecast Pro, we have started a brand new project. In this example, we're going to break the data down by customer and distribute that to our individual salespeople. As mentioned, in order to make this work, we need to load in a filter file. So here in my data manager, you see we have our historic data, but also our filters by customers, so that I can assign each customer to an individual salesperson and use this to break up the data and create the child projects. So once again, we will go to the Project Collaboration Manager. And again, we're starting over, so we're going to need to create our individual child projects. Do things a little differently this time. The first is we are not going to enable forecasting, so we can see what that looks like when it's been disabled. We are going to work at the customer level. And now we're going to use our filters to break up our parent project into our child projects. So here we have our salesperson filter, and we have 5 different salespeople, 1 for each customer, and we will create all 5 of these child projects. Let's go ahead and create that. So once again, we've created our 5 child projects, 1 for each salesperson. You can also see that it tells us that the forecasting has been disabled, so they will only be responsible for making overrides, not any of the forecasting responsibilities. I'm going to go ahead and open up Abby's and take a look at her project. Now, here in Abby's child project, you can see we've broken down the data by customer. So she is in charge of Nexus Supply, and so she only sees this single customer. What you will also notice in the hierarchy is that there are many locked symbols at different nodes in the hierarchy. And why is this? Let's look at a simplified example where we have 2 SKUs and 2 customers for each SKU. Now in our example that we're using, we are breaking it down so that only a single customer is moved from the parent project into the child projects. As such, we don't have the grand total for the SKUs, we just have a subtotal. Thus, we can see the subtotal, but we can't make changes directly to the SKU total themselves. They are locked. Now, in a different example, we could have taken all of the customers from an individual SKU. So for example, if we take both customers for SKU 1, but only 1 for SKU 2, SKU 1 would be unlocked because we have the full total, but SKU 2 still would be locked. This is why in our regional project, we did not see these locked nodes everywhere, because we pulled from a very high regional level. But back here in Abby's project, because we only have a single customer, we don't have the full totals for any of the SKUs, thus we don't have the full totals for any of the groups above. So while we can click on these and view the information, we cannot make changes here. You can't see this on my screen, but I'm trying to type in and it simply will not let me. The other thing that we have locked in these child projects is the forecasting ability. You'll see when I come to the forecasting tab, everything is grayed out because we did not assign forecasting responsibility. Abby is only responsible for making overrides in her child project. Now returning to our parent project, you can see all 5 of our child projects have been updated, so we'll go ahead and import all of their changes. I can close, and once again, any changes that were made in the child project have been restored. Notice that we are still using the statistical forecast here in this parent project. That's because we did not enable the statistical forecasting in the child projects. Thus, all the statistical forecasting is happening here in the parent project, and we will continue to use the statistical forecast from the parent project throughout the entire process. Finally, let's talk about updating our parent project when a new month begins. So here in my Excel file, we're simply going to add our new month's worth of historical data. So I'm going to paste in here our new values for March of 2024. So we have updated our historical data file. Now we need to update our parent project. Back here in Forecast Pro, when I open up my project, I am prompted that my data has been modified since the last time I used it. So I can either do nothing, which is go back to my snapshot, or yes, recalculate the data and reapply all of my settings, models, and everything that go along with it. So here, once again, if we open up our graph and our override grid, you will see we have our grand total. All of our changes from the previous month are still in here. So all of our changes that came in from our child projects are still here. Our data now goes through March of 2024. We're generating a forecast in April. After we make all of our changes in the parent project, we would review, make any additional model changes, any overrides that we need to make, and once that is complete, we would then distribute the child projects using the project collaborators. So once again, we would simply go to all 5 of our salesperson child projects, and we would simply say update child. This will push out the new updated historical data as well as the new statistical forecast while maintaining all of the overrides that were available in the child projects as well. So this would be a routine process that we would just repeat over and over again each month. So with that, let's discuss the conclusions of this webinar. Today we've discussed a lot about how to set up a collaborative environment using Forecast Pro. As discussed, most companies who use Forecast Pro have multiple users of the software and need to set up some sort of collaborative environment. Hopefully today's webinar showed you how to do that using our project collaboration. This new project collaboration is an easy and efficient way to work with a larger team to gather feedback and to make changes as effectively as possible in Forecast Pro. It allows you to set up smaller child projects that each individual user can maintain. You can set controls as to whether they are responsible for the forecasting or not, or just to give feedback through the overrides. In today's webinar, we answered a lot of key questions about who the main players will be in this process, as well as who's responsible for what, and how you can optimize your collaborative process. In today's webinar, we answered some key questions that are really important at setting up a collaborative environment. The first is who's the key players? Who will be responsible for what? We also showed how you can assign who's responsible for the statistical forecasting, as well as who's just going to make overrides. We also discussed the importance of how you break up your parent project into smaller child projects and along what dimension of the hierarchy. So finally, time for those questions. Yes, so thank you all who have made it through the webinar, and we would like to take some questions. So as mentioned at the beginning, if you want to use the chat functionality or the Q&A functionality built into Zoom, please send along your questions now. Type them into the chat. My colleague Franklin is here to help me out. He will review these questions and pass them along to me. We'll try to answer any questions now. If you ask a question and we don't get to it during this session here, we will follow up with an email. So please, type in any question you can. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Franklin, so maybe you want to let us know what questions have come in and what should we try to answer here?
Yeah, so we got a couple, and as James said, as you think of them, please feel free to add them to the chat. So I do have one that says, how do you choose? How do you choose? I think big picture, whether or not to let the child project have forecasting.
Okay, so good question. As we showed in the demonstration, you can set the child projects to either have forecasting enabled or not. The big question, of course, is why would you set one or the other? And it really comes down to the responsibility of the folks who are working in the child projects. In certain environments, you'll basically have multiple planners, and each one is responsible for their own forecasting. So you'd want to give them access to generating a forecast and changing the statistical models. However, in other examples, you might just be trying to get some feedback. So in our second example, we're giving sales their own child projects, and we were just asking them to report based off the customer information they're getting. They may only need access to making overrides. And so really it depends on the makeup of the team, as well as the responsibilities for the folks who are working in the child projects. Are they planners and need access to the forecasting, or are we just trying to get some feedback and we want them to make overrides directly?
I do see some rolling in here. So one simple one: how to request a demo of Forecast Pro to try this out?
Oh, okay. Excellent question. So we do offer free demos of Forecast Pro. Usually they'd be 60 to 90 minutes. We can use your own data. We will follow up. So whoever's asking that, we will follow up directly and have one of our sales folks get in touch with you so they can set up a demonstration. Again, we do it online via Teams. We can use your data if you would like and really show you how all of this works. So if anybody is interested in demos, we will definitely, just put it in the chat. We'll make sure to get you in touch with the right person who can help you with that.
And another pretty simple one, I think. What kind of documentation is there to read up on the details of what we saw in the webinar?
Okay, excellent question. So here I can share my screen. So if we come up here, just in Forecast Pro, we can go ahead and here in Forecast Pro, if you come up to the Help tab, oops, over here, if I could get the Zoom meeting thing to move out of the way, you can see we have a tutorial section that walks through all the different tutorial lessons that will walk through there is a tutorial lesson on project collaboration, and then the program reference really deep dives into some of this. Also note that we do install sample projects with the system, so you can actually play around with this functionality and set all that up. So you can come in there and do all that. Okay, good. Other questions?
Yeah. I have a question here that says, can you change the hierarchy structure of any child projects or any child projects that you add, or must they all be the same within the parent project?
Okay, so excellent question. When you initially create the child projects, they will all have the same hierarchy as the parent. However, in the child projects themselves, you may have access to changing the hierarchy or not. So here in our second example, where we did it by salesperson, if I were to go in here and once again open up Abby's project, so we can see the child project here with Abby's project, you'll see that, as we mentioned in the webinar, all of her group level totals are locked to her because we only exported an individual customer down here at the bottom. So she has all these locked nodes. So she actually wouldn't be able to rearrange the hierarchy because she doesn't actually have access to any hierarchy levels. However, in our first example, when we were doing it by region, because we had full access to certain levels of the hierarchy, for instance, at the product family, at the SKU, or at the customer, you could manipulate those levels underneath it when you have full access to it. So a lot of it is determined by how you actually set up the child projects and whether they have full access to an entire hierarchy level or not. If you do have full access to multiple hierarchy levels, those can be rearranged. But if you don't, as we see here, where Abby only has access to one level, she can't rearrange these because she simply doesn't have access to the full hierarchy structure.
Great. And we do have a few more. So one is from a developer standpoint, what training exists? Where can we learn about interfaces, exports, imports, setup, etc.?
Sure. So obviously we are starting these webinars. Franklin and myself are the main trainers here at Forecast Pro, and we're starting this new series of webinars that are going to be much more Forecast Pro specific. And if you have not already, our next webinar will be in May, and we'll be talking about new product forecasting. But if you want a more in-depth training offering, we do offer that. Franklin and I both do run training sessions. It's something that you can set up with us, and you can either have sort of standard trainings or you can do custom training and consulting, and we're happy to help you with that. So if you do have specific questions about training needs and you want to go beyond just the tutorial lessons that come with it or some of the webinars that we have run in the past or will continue to run in the future, we do offer customized training. We're happy to help you with that. So, just reach out in the chat or reach out to Franklin or myself directly, and we would always be happy to help to have sort of a logistics call and talk about how to set up training going forward.
And one other one, to fully utilize the project collaboration feature, does that require that everyone have a TRAC forecaster license for all potential users, or let's talk about that.
Okay, excellent question. Yes, so we showed in the demonstration whether or not you can enable statistical forecasting or not. That obviously dictates what license you need. So a collaborator can work in project collaboration. The parent project has to be created in a forecaster license, but we can distribute the child projects to collaborators if the statistical forecasting is disabled. So obviously collaborators cannot do statistical forecasting. So if you sent them a child project that had it enabled, they would not be able to utilize that. But a forecaster license could. So when you're opening the child projects, either a forecaster or collaborator license can do that. It just depends on whether they would have access to the forecast generation. And so obviously, if you're going to distribute this to collaborator users, you would want to disable the forecasting because they don't have access to that anyways. Okay, good. Any other questions there that came through, Franklin?
I do not have any at this time.
Okay, perfect. Great. So everybody, thank you for the questions and thank you for sticking with us through this webinar. As mentioned, this is the first of our quarterly webinars that we will run that are going to be much more Forecast Pro specific. We are also going to continue with our standard quarterly webinars that we have been running for 10 years now. Those will continue as well, which are much more sort of general forecasting knowledge. But these Forecast Pro based webinars are going to continue as well. They will be free as always. So please, if you have not, sign up. We will also send out email reminders to everybody shortly, just so you can get onto this kind of scheduling. And again, the video of this will be posted to our website and to our YouTube channel, where you'll be able to access it, as well as any of the future sessions that we put on. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. And hopefully we'll see you in our future webinars. So take care, everyone. Bye now.